Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 14 February 2022, Valentine's night. Coming to you this evening with a knife review. A knife review of this blade, the 4320 Kershaw Federalist. Full disclosure, asterisk, and alarm. This review does include paid promotion from Knives Ship Free, the best place to buy knives, period. Yes, I announced earlier this afternoon that we will be kicking off a knife review series jointly between the TheApostleP channel on the YouTube and knivesshipfree.com. And this series will feature US-made cutlery. This is the first installment. The Kershaw 4320 Federalist. This is what we call on the TheApostleP channel a fusion knife. So it is a slip joint mechanism, albeit an interesting one, but not traditional construction. So we have modern construction, modern materials, but a lockless mechanism. Let's take a look at it, shall we? Get that box out of the way. Oh, but before we do, it is a made in USA Kershaw. Here is the knife. It is a right smart looking piece, don't you think? Let's take a close look at some of the etching. Up here in the ricasso, we have the maker's mark indicating in-house Kershaw design. The blade steel denoted as CPM 154. We have the reverse American flag and the model number. Come over here to the show side, and we have the Kershaw maker's mark. So the Federalist, what is it? Well, I think it's a pretty cool little pocket knife, actually. What we have is a clip point blade in beautifully stonewashed CPM 154 with a slightly widening belly and an extremely subtle recurve. It is very slicey in geometry. Just 87 thousandths thick is the blade stock, with an inclusive bevel angle on that full flat ground bevel of 4.2 degrees. So an extremely gradual edge grind, terminating to just 21 thousandths in thickness behind the edge bevel, and that is extremely consistent in thickness from tip to hilt. It is a half-stop slip joint mechanism, but not using a backspring. Instead, I don't know if you can actually see this too well through the handle. Well, there you can see a glint off one of the detented leaves extending from that liner. And on the other side, I think you can see another one. If I can get it to, there you go. Show you a picture of the knife disassembled. First is a picture of all the components laid out nicely, liners, scales, and hardware. And you can see each liner has its own, I won't call them locking leaves, but detent leaves. And then if you look closely at the blade, I think I've got a tight shot of the tang area. You're going to see two through holes, one for the full open position, one for the closed position, and then one not completely drilled through detent for that half stop. So the blade length is going to be 3 1/4 inches. The handle length, I measure at 4 5/16. It's listed in the data sheet from Kershaw at 4 1/4, but I think it's a little bit longer than that. So not the most efficient blade to handle ratio. It looks like the pivot's fairly close to the end, but it's a little deceiving because that most forward point is pretty far forward. So 4 5/16 I'm going to call the handle length. It is fully steel lined, as you can see from the pictures. And then for structure at the back of the knife, we've got this black FRN backspacer. And I've got a close-up shot of that. So really only one positive point of location about right here. I think you can see that little boss in the picture. And then 2 screws going through the handle and then terminating in what appear to be, they're probably knurled nuts that are probably epoxied into that micarta handle, I'm guessing. Couldn't really see any evidence of glue, but you would think they'd have to be. T6 heads on those. A lanyard hole, a nice generously sized lanyard hole. Chamfered micarta around the hole. The finish on the micarta handle is sort of rough hewn, a pretty coarse sander finish. Now if we look around the edges of the handle, nothing is hafted. So the edges of the liners are raw. I would assume these are EDM cut. But nothing is sanded after assembly. And you know, the fit and finish of the scales, liners, and backspacer, not super precise, but not horrible either. The action on the knife for a rather unconventional mechanism, I think, is pretty excellent. Got good retention in the handle, firm tension coming to half stop. And that half stop detent, as you can see with the not through hole in the middle, is a little softer than the open and closed detents. That fully open detent, pretty strong. They're just 3 little jimp cuts in the spine of the handle. If I have my thumb in that area, very hard to break that knife off the full open position. But if I come forward, pretty easy to do. The knife opens via a nail nick mechanism. And if I were to give it a pull weight, breaking off that detent, it's, you know, we would call this, it's hard to translate, but about a 6.5. It is hard to translate from back spring to a detent, but it's nice and firm. 0 blade play as adjusted. And blade centering is dead on the money. In hand, the knife is generous in handle. Very nice in the saber grip. And because of that slight recurve and broad area through the belly, it really presents the belly of the knife into the work at a very efficient angle. In that overhand pinch grip, which is how I do most of my cutting, the knife is super comfortable. Notice when I go to that grip, my second finger doesn't really use this generous finger groove. It kind of hangs out behind it. I guess you could scrunch up on it. But in the hammer grip, the knife is, because of its very slim 395 thousandths handle thickness, it feels a little skinny in that grip. But when I go to the draw cut grip, that seems to go away. And then if I use that vertical draw cut grip, because of that very round butt end shape, it's super comfortable. And by the way, the weight on this knife, guys, 2.1 ounces, almost in bug out territory. The pivot on this knife is sort of standard, but sort of not. Over here on the off side, we've got a pretty standard T8 Torx driven male pivot screw. But over here on the show side, a pretty cool milled kite-shaped triangle that not only gives it kind of a pop of design style, but also retains the pivot from turning in the handle. One thing I think is kind of interesting, probably not a big deal, but that retention shape is only executed between the head of the female pivot and the micarta. The steel liners are just drilled round at the dimension of the pivot barrel. Is that a big deal? I mean, micarta is pretty soft, no doubt, but that's really not going to take a lot of force to stay straight, so not a big deal in a knife like this. Just a super classic looking design, don't you think? And it's a very satisfying mechanism to operate, I gotta say. Super positive. And when you think about what this knife competes with, I think what comes to mind immediately is the Benchmade Proper, which is made from similar materials, S30V instead of CPM 154, but a lot wedgier blade design, a shorter knife, very similar in fit and finish, but that knife does have a back spring, and you guys who watch my channel know that I've sold a bunch of those, and I always refer to the walk and talk on the Proper as proper, meaning it sucks. I mean, it just does. This knife, even though it's not a back spring mechanism, is really satisfying. Makes good noises. Just behaves very well. And just a little rabbit trail here. Over the last couple of years, a lot of big brands who specialize in modern folders have tried to enter this fusion knife market with, I gotta say, pretty abysmal results. Some of the Euro market Spydercos, like the UKPK and the Urban, those are okay. No better than this, even though those are spring knives instead of just detent knives. But some of them, we've already beat up on the Proper sufficiently, but that knife, just not a good effort for a little more money than this one. And then you've got, the ZT 0230, which is kind of a sheep's foot knife, smaller in dimension than this, but with let's say a pricier steel and carbon fiber, but almost $200 for that one, and a very similar mechanism. Then you got the Hinderer XM Slippy, which might be the best of the bunch that I'm going to mention, but still a little weird and a whole bunch of money. And then a knife from, you guys know, one of my favorite companies, the Chris Reeve Impinda. I hate that knife, and it is a whole lot of money. Just a horrible walk and talk. So for barely over $100, I think Kershaw's got something here. And I think it's super functional as well. The blade geometry is awesome for what a slip joint pocket knife is good for, which is sliciness. Under 90 thousandths stock, 4.2 degrees inclusive angle, big, tall, slicey profile, and thin behind the edge. And because of that consistency and thickness, I think it's going to sharpen pretty well. One little small area of concern is, as usual, they gave us very little room between the end of the ricasso, the radius plunge grind, and the back of the edge. So I think I can probably sharpen this and make it look good without extending the sharpening choil, but probably for only about one sharpening. Then we're going to have to work in that area, but that's not unusual at all. I'd like that choil to be just a little longer, but oh well. The nice thing is, this surface does nothing when the knife closes. Just one stop pin for both open and closed positions. So you can see where the blade tang hits the stop pin and the sharpening choil's out here in space. So I can extend that choil as I sharpen over time as much as I want to without hurting anything. So for between $104 and $109, depending on where you buy the Federalist, how did Kershaw do? Well, what do I like about it? I love, as I've said, the blade shape and the geometry. The ergonomics of the handle, very solid and plenty of real estate. The styling, I think, is excellent. That just looks like a pocket knife, doesn't it? The mechanism, though unconventional, I find very satisfying and very secure. Easy to close one-handed. So where do I think Kershaw could improve this design? And I hope it goes over well, because I can see kind of more expensive versions of this knife on the horizon. I think the fit and finish could be better, if they decide to go up level with something like a satin G10 or a carbon fiber scale set. I'd like to see them go away from this rather weak FRN backspacer and maybe do some shouldered hourglass standoffs, or maybe, it would be cool, because the handle is so open and because of the shape of the pivot. Wouldn't it be cool if they did kind of maybe an anodized aluminum floating backspacer and carry the geometry theme from the pivot into that backspacer area? And I'm not quite sure how these female body nuts are going to hold up, whether they're going to stay well adhered to that micarta or not. There's just not a lot of material around them, but probably not a knife you're going to disassemble very often. But I'd like to see some nice shouldered standoffs. But all in all, when you consider what else is available in this genre, I think Kershaw kind of killed it. I'm going to kind of shut the camera down now, and I'm going to put on an ApostleP edge and then come back and show you what it looks like sharpened. Because that, one thing that does, when you sharpen the edge of a knife at a consistent angle, it's going to expose any flaws in the grind geometry. I'm a little bit concerned about this area back here, so we'll see how it comes out. Because of the blade geometry, thin with a very gradual primary bevel angle, I'm going to sharpen this one like I would sharpen a GEC traditional. So 18 degrees per side, no micro bevel. And we'll be back in a few minutes and see how it came out. Okay, guys, we're back. And as you can see, there is the finished product. I did kind of guess right, I think. 18 degrees per side, no micro bevel. Sharpened that to 1100 on diamond, and then stropped to 2 microns, so just slightly toothy. And I think you can see what I was talking about at the base of the edge. Just starting to flare ever so slightly. Probably would be best to move that choil forward, I don't know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch on the next sharpening. How'd they do from the factory? I should have cut some paper for you guys before I sharpened it, but it was cutting limp newsprint style paper, knife catalog paper, almost cleanly, just a little bit catchy, but it wouldn't push cut. And if I were guessing, the offside here was sharpened very close to 18 degrees per side, and then the show side was at about 20. So I had to take a little more material off this side to get a nice symmetrical bevel. But one thing I wanted you to notice, it's kind of hard to show you with the glare, but look how consistent the thickness or the width of that edge bevel is. all the way along the length of that blade. Super nice factory grind from Kershaw. Let's see if it cuts. Nice and quiet. And it does push cut. I'm not sure how good it'll be through the camera, but yeah. Pretty nice. Very slicey. Just as you would want from a traditional slip joint or a fusion slip joint. I think that's about all we got. No more paces to put this one through. Now, if you're interested in purchasing this knife, of course, my recommended retailer is Knives Ship Free since 2007. In the description underneath this video will be a link to the Kershaw Federalist product page at knifeshipfree.com, and that is an affiliate link. So when you use it, the Apostle P channel will make a little coin. So I encourage you to do that, if you're so inclined. That's all for this one. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Remember, the word is sharp. Talk to you soon.